up. All right, so my name is Dr. Emily Lynell Edwards, and today I will be talking a little bit about a particular part of our research. We were part of the Archives Unleashed cohort, myself and my team. I'm, very recently coming to this now as an independent scholar, having transitioned into the world of publishing. Yeah, very happy to be here today. And I'll be discussing working with two web archive collections that focused on the Mormon Bloggernacle, and I will talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but focusing particularly on Mormon mommy bloggers. My goal for this presentation is to talk a little bit about our findings, but also about our methodology, some challenges that we encountered as researchers working with web archive data, and what we were able to produce working with the Arch platform, thinking about derivatives and thinking about some of these questions about data. So I will just go ahead and jump right in. Before I get into the nitty gritty, though, of working with web archives, I wanted to talk a little bit about our point of entry into this research project. I'm not sure if there are any reality television fans on the call. Perhaps you've seen The Secret Lives of Mormon Housewives, but in our sort of current contemporary zeitgeist, there's a lot of discussion about Mormon mother influencers. So you can see this show on Hulu really captures that. But there's been a lot of press and discussion about the significance and the role that Mormon mommy bloggers, Mormon mommy influencers play within this broader digital ecosystem. So my team was very interested in this particular digital community, but we wanted to look back at more sort of recent web history and say, we notice this phenomena is happening right now, but can we go back to the early 2000s, the 2010s, and really understand how did we get where we are today? Thinking particularly about the role that mommy influencers play in political movements, thinking about public health, vaccines, discussion about politics. So we were really interested to say, how do we sort of go back in time and look at this other period of web history? And of course, to answer that question, we had to work with web archive data. So this was sort of then our point of entry into becoming part of the Archives Unleashed cohort and working with Arch to say, we need to, get into the space. And to do that, we have to work with types of data that are perhaps unfamiliar to us as qualitative feminist researchers. So that's our context, really, is that we were really interested in Mormon mommy bloggers, thinking about the long form blog as a particular historic medium of communication in internet history. And so we call them MMBs for short. And so we were really looking at this community as an underexplored, but also key builder of Web 2.0 when we think about the influence that bloggers had in the early 2000s and during the 2010s, which was really the golden age of blogging. So MMBs, as we were interested to explore and chart this community, not only were they key players as mommy bloggers, but they really built the Bloggernacle. And the Bloggernacle, of course, is a play on Mormon Tabernacle Choir and blog. So this is a really thriving sub-community of bloggers that was quite vibrant in the 2010s. And we were interested to position MMBs as these sort of pioneers of this emergent or then emergent form of monetized digital labor. Of course, now we're quite familiar with things like influencer marketing, for example. But in the 2010s, this was something very new, having advertisements on your blog or including affiliate links. And we wanted to understand how were these practices pioneered and articulated, and how were these individual creators connected in digital space? And of course, to answer that question, we had to work with web archives. And a larger question we were interested in exploring, of course, was any tension between feminist activism, branding, and particular just neoliberal feminism in general. So that's a little bit about some of our scholarly interest and how we were sort of led to web archives to answer some of these questions. So we were working with the Mormon websites collection and the Mormon blogs collection. So we were, working with these collections that were sort of predetermined. They're from Brigham Young University, and as you can see from the title, this captures the full spectrum of digital Mormon conversation online. So we were not working with collections that were already focused particularly on Mormon women. So we had to find ways to parse through these collections to really answer our research questions. And so to do that, we used ARCH, the Archives Research Computing Hub, and we had to sort of partition these collections into different derivative types to work with them. And I'll talk a little bit more about the particular types that we were focused on, looking specifically at CSV files, looking at network visualizations. So we were working with these web archives to answer these questions. And we had to learn how to answer the right questions. And I'm happy to talk more about our trial and error and our challenges. But as I mentioned before, we were coming to this as qualitative feminist researchers. We had experience working with scraped social media data, also working with physical traditional archives, actually going to archives and touching physical objects, and also doing oral history interviews. So web archives were a completely new frontier for us. So we had to recalibrate some of our research questions to understand how are we asking structural versus granular questions. We're working with, just traces of information versus, perhaps like a whole diary or a whole interview. So our challenge was making data smaller, more responsive, and more legible to us as a particular team to engage in a variety of readings and visualizations. So what worked for us might look completely different from a larger team that had maybe more computational quantitative expertise and background, but our approach was really focused on storytelling and reconstructing this informational ecosystem that we were looking at. So that's just a little bit about our approach. So the particular methodology that we were employing, and I'm just talking about one particular aspect of this research project that culminated in an article, was social network analysis of influential web domains. So Arch was, quite key for us to say, we have these collections, but what we're really interested to see is how are these web domains connected? Who's connected to who? We want to understand who are the content creators, and we want to visualize them in space. So we were able to take these derivatives from Arch and say, we know how to do social network analysis. We can pop this into Gephi. We can use these CSV files. We can make this data work for us and then visualize it, clean it, parse it. Another key part of this for us was thematic content analysis of tags and advertisements. So I'll talk a little bit more about the particular technical process we took to identify the web domains we were interested in. But then this was where our traditional expertise came in to say, we're engaging in this sort of qualitative analysis to look at tags and to look at individual blogs. So this was really in some sense a mixed methods approach, that we were using more of this top down level structural analysis of web domains, which was key for us, but then we were also looking at the actual data. And so I wanted to share an overview of our findings, as well, to just give you a sense of what did this look like in practice for this research project. Through these methods, we found that MMBs were really laying the groundwork for the formalization of contemporary forms of content creation, and also influencing as a form of digital labor, as a job. I think this might seem not very dramatic to us today. We know that social media content creators, they're engaged in work. This is very professionalized, but in 2010 and 2013, this was something very new. So MMBs often were, not engaged in traditional forms of work outside the home. Their blogs were their work. They became work. And so this was, at that time, really formalizing this form of digital labor. We also found through visualizing linked domains that there were dominant MMBs, and I'll talk about one in just a moment, but also peripheral pro-amateur creators contributed. So instead of looking at, this community blog by blog, like you might do, if you were just engaged in a qualitative analysis, using Arch, we were able to get more of a structural global understanding of what does this community look like in space, and understand how folks are connected. And so we were able to find out that blogging and monetization occurred across an ideological spectrum. And we were really seeing that blogging was, for many of these creators, a means to visibilize and hopefully monetize this uncompensated domestic labor that they were carrying out as wives and mothers. And then, of course, this goes back to some, historic feminist conversations about compensation and housework, and then also connects to contemporary discussions about aspirational labor of pro-am creators. So that's just a little bit of our, traditional critical, qualitative, cultural feminist perspective coming in there. And then, the upshot of this, though, is that we found that, MMBs were sort of caught between a changing digital economy and, their feminist commitments and, viewing this work as a labor of love in a way. So, that's from the article. If you're interested, I'm happy to share that article with you, but just wanted to kind of get our findings in here before moving on to what I think may be more interesting, which is the visualization of what does this look like in practice. So as I mentioned, social network analysis was one key point of entry for us into web archive data. So we were able to take these derivatives and then visualize the most important website domains. So as you can see here, Feminist Mormon Housewives, that was one of our key MMB blogs. You can see that's in sort of this purple pink. And so this was on the left, you'll see from the Mormon websites collection, you can see that Feminist Mormon Housewives, after partitioning these different web domains according to modularity class, so looking at sub-communities within the larger Bloggernacle, was really anchoring in the foundation of the MMB community. And by looking at this from the structural perspective, we were able to actually visualize that. And then you can really see over here, green is led by the official blog of the Mormon Church, LDS. And so you can see actually visually the ideological divide within the Bloggernacle during this period. So we found this extremely interesting, thinking about MMB creators as actually really directly attached to one blog that was articulating very strong feminist commitments. But again, this was only possible, working through these different data types. So just making sure I'm on time here. I just want to shout out Feminist Mormon Housewives. As you saw, that was the largest circle, the most influential blog. While Feminist Mormon Housewives was not necessarily, I would say, an MMB, they directly, identified themselves as housewives. This was developed by Lisa Butterworth and her friends, and it really grew to be the locus of online Mormon feminist discussion. And they didn't exhibit any monetization. But they were, as you can see on the previous slide, maybe I can't go back. Well, that's okay. They were really the locus here. So in the interest of time, I'll move on to, monetization, emphasizing this. So while Feminist Mormon Housewives was really the most influential blog, as you can see, they're at the top here. This was also the range of blogs that we were looking at of more professional amateur creators. You can also see here that we anonymize them as well. That's something I'm happy to talk more about, thinking about how to ethically work through web archive content. So, we wanted to ensure that these creators who are producing content many years ago, with no expectation that their content would be scraped by a web crawler, were in fact still anonymous. So we anonymized them, but we included the page rank and then also some anonymized examples tracking, did they exhibit monetization? So going to our findings here, you can see that this was an interesting period of flux where a lot of MMBs were integrating ads and in-text product recommendations and really sort of pioneering this form of influencer marketing at this early period, even though they were really deeply connected to feminist Mormon housewives. So as I mentioned, the conclusion is that this period of internet history revealed a lot of tensions, but MMBs really did pioneer this form of influencer marketing in some interesting ways. And so I'd like to just wrap up here thinking about researcher considerations, which was, how do we engage with big web archive data? And for us, big was, sort of a relative question. For us, terabytes, that was really big. It was big data if I couldn't open it on my, individual computer, and I had to kind of clean it and make the file smaller. That might look very different for another team. And we were really interested, how can we answer these critical feminist qualitative questions, with CSV, with text, with GEXF files? How can we, answer our research questions? Do we have to change our research questions? And of course, how can we ethically engage with individual content creators as well? And so some, techniques we found, I mentioned Gephi, a data visualization software program, but we also had to learn how to work with the command command line, which might seem very basic, to some folks, but, for us, this was a learning experience. We had to, identify statistics and patterns, and then we also had to get into Google Colab, use Python to, export these network derivatives and make them smaller. So with that, I will, yep, thank you so much. I want to make sure, yeah, we have, time and everything. But yeah, please connect with me. That's my, my Twitter, email, website. And I also want to shout out my team members, Dr. Robin Hershkowitz, Lauren Andrikonic, and Sabrina Zhao that also worked on this project.